I have a confession. I'm a designer who doesn't actually know what their style is, as my work doesn't resonate with me. So I'm going on a search for my creative identity. The plan? 10 posters, 10 design styles. The twist is that they are inspired by Japanese aesthetics, because Japanese art and culture has always been my source of inspiration. This is part 1 where I tackled the first 5 styles, which are the simpler genres, as I saved the more complex and experimental styles for part 2. Is this going to be a creative breakthrough or a total burnout? Let's see if I survive day 1. We'll start with minimalism. The philosophy of minimalism is that less is more. The key principle is to focus on important elements and avoid the use of decoration without any function, leaving white space, also known as negative space, which is the defining trait of minimalism. I use the aesthetic of Zen, which is a Japanese philosophy from the 12th century. Its visual principles are called Ma and Wabi-Sabi. These two principles mean negative space, emphasizing on austerity and the combination of natural materials. This perfectly captures the essence of minimalist design.
I started off by cropping out a Zen sand circle and used the eraser brush tool to smoothen its edges to make it look natural. I then selected an image of this Buddha statue and used the eraser tool to refine the edges. This is Miroku Buddha, who is the Buddha of the future. He is often shown in a meditative pose, seated in a half lotus position with his right hand touching his cheek. I feel drawn to this specific Buddha because it evokes peace with its elegant pose. I placed the sand circle behind the statue's head to act as a halo, commonly depicted in East Asian Buddhist art. I added the text with the headline of Zen being the largest text in the visual hierarchy for emphasis. I placed the Buddha in the center of the composition, so it's the main focus, leaving lots of white space around. I started to experiment with text composition, using a thin sans serif font for a minimalist look. The quotes relate to easing stress and anxiety, reminding us to pause, to breathe in, connecting with our mind for peace and clarity. I lastly gave the Buddha image a difference filter to blend into the beige background. Overall, I feel like this poster embodies the Zen aesthetic, as the composition is clean with a natural color palette, being a gentle reminder to ground ourselves in times of struggle.
The next design style is modernism. Beginning in the early 20th century, the modern design style was a new contrast from traditional forms and conventions, its ideals being functionality, clarity, and simplicity in design. Modernism was the foundation for movements like Bauhaus, Swiss style, and minimalism.
I began by selecting out these masks, which are used in traditional Noh theatre. Fun fact is that Noh is the oldest form of theatre still performed today, and was popular in the Heian period, which was medieval Japan. I chose to use these images of 3 masks, the first one being the demon called the Hanya. The second is a mask depicting a woman's face transforming into a demon and is called Namanari. The third one is the face of a woman called Komote. The story in one of the Noh plays is that a woman was possessed by so much jealousy that her face transformed into a demon. It really encapsulates how jealousy can transform someone into a demon figuratively. As you get filled with so much hatred and negativity, I started to arrange the texts, aligning them with the grid as modernism uses grid systems for structure and visual alignment. This creates a logical, orderly composition that emphasizes clarity and visual impact. I chose a central composition, placing each mask next to a letter to create balance. For the text, I used the Helvetica font because it's modernist, and I placed the tagline with its Japanese script on both sides to frame the composition. I added a grid behind the elements to create contrast with the white background, and added some shadows behind the letters for depth. Lastly, I added a red circle in the center to add contrast with the neutral palette, as a feature of modernist design is to use black, white, and grey with only one accent color. This is the finished second poster.
You always see this style when searching for typography posters. It's also named the International Typographic Style, which emerged in 1950s Switzerland. It focused on typography and grids, with the visual principles of cleanliness, objectivity, and simplicity.
I began by aligning the text along the grid lines, trying different text orientations to create an asymmetrical composition, which is a defining characteristic of Swiss posters. The type used is Helvetica, which was developed in 1957, becoming a defining feature of the Swiss design movement. I added a red circle to highlight the main focus, and positioned the text along the grid lines, as a feature of Swiss style is to have all the elements aligned with a grid. I adjusted the tracking and leading of the text, so they align along the grid more accurately. I placed an image of a geisha in the red circle for emphasis, and used a clipping mask to frame it in the circle. Then I added a dotted overlay for texture. A feature of Swiss posters is to use unembellished photography to support clear communication, so I didn't edit the image too much. I changed some of the text to red and white to create contrast and emphasis for the headline. This poster advertises the Gion district, which is famous for geisha culture. And the quote is from one of my favorite movies, The Members of a Geisha, where I added an iconic quote from the movie at the bottom right. Following modernism, I kept the palette neutral, with a bright Swiss red for contrast. This is the finished third poster.
The next design style is Bauhaus. The Bauhaus design style was created from the Bauhaus school in Germany in the early 20th century. It was founded by Walter Gropius and was formed as a response to the maximalist ornamentation of Art Nouveau. It combined art, craft, and technology, aiming to create functional and affordable designs that will be mass-produced for the modern industrial society.
I used Adobe Illustrator to create my poster, as it has geometric shapes that are a key trait of Bauhaus, which are compositions of shapes and primary colors. I created triangular mountains using the pen tool and worked on vectorizing the first character in my vector illustration. This poster depicts the scene from the myth of Amaterasu, who is the sun goddess of the Shinto religion. This is an ukiyo-e artwork showing the moment the other gods bring her out of the cave she hid herself in, bringing light and life back to the world. Her name means she who illuminates the heavens, or shining in heaven. As the ruler of the heavens, she symbolizes light, purity, and life, and is considered the direct ancestor of the Japanese imperial family. Which is obviously not real, but it is cool though. Imagine saying your first ancestor was a literal god. I worked on vectorizing her clothes with the shape and pen tools, making sure the shapes look geometric. To give her face some color, I used the circle tool for her makeup and added the Gaussian blur to make the shapes become soft. Then I vectorized the mirror, which is one of the 3 treasures of Japan, the other 2 being a sword and a jewel. The mirror in the myth was used to lure the goddess out of hiding by distracting her with her own reflection. Then I worked on the second deity known as Tajikarao, who is known for his immense strength that pulled the goddess out of the cave and sealed the cave entrance with a rock. He is the Shinto god of strength, physical power, and sports. He is worshipped at Togakushi Shrine in Nagano, Japan. I used the shape tools like the rectangle to create his shoes and started to work on adjusting his head by using the circle tool to create a oval shape, as well as making his hair using the circle shape tools. Ame no Uzume is the Shinto goddess of the dawn, performing arts, dancing, and happiness. I used the rectangle tool to create the shape of her dress and created long sleeves for her limbs. I decided to give her a smiling expression to represent her comical personality, and in the myth she was holding a branch while dancing. I then used the pen tool to create the stems of the branch that she was holding. Once I was done with vectorizing her clothing, I placed her on top of the rectangle which represented the bucket that she danced on top on. The robe is called a shiminawa, and is used in Shinto rituals to mark sacred spaces. And in the myth, it prevented the goddess from re-entering the cave. The white shapes on it are called shide, which are zigzag-shaped paper streamers. I then adjusted the mirror into the composition and started to work on making the sun rays behind the goddess's head, using the circle tool to create the shapes, as well as the triangle tools to create the sun rays coming out from the center. I decided to use the color yellow and use the gradient tool to create a golden-like shimmering effect. I proceeded to adjust each triangle around the circle, extending up to the end of the poster, and I used the gradient tool to adjust the gradient direction, making sure the darker yellow starts first, gradually turning lighter outwards to represent natural light emitting from the sun. Lastly, I added the text in the Bauhaus font and changed the colors to red, blue, and yellow to follow the Bauhaus style more accurately. This is the finished third poster.
The next design style is flat design. Flat graphic design is a minimalist two-dimensional style, characterized by clean, simple shapes, bold, vibrant colors, and sharp typography. It is often seen in UI/UX design, icons, and illustrations without gradients or 3D effects. It emerged with the adoption of smartphones and high-resolution screens. It emphasizes usability, minimalism, and clarity, removing unnecessary details for functionality. This movement began in the early 2010s, with major companies adopting flat design in their operating systems.
I began by arranging my text in the center, and my idea for this was to create a magazine cover for the Tokyo Tour, which is a Fox magazine collection celebrating Tokyo and illustration. My inspiration for this was the sakura season, as it's common to appreciate them blooming every year in spring. I used sakura vectors from FreePic for the background and arranged them around the composition. I decided to go with a more pastel color palette for this poster because I wanted to use the pink shades of the flowers. I then used the image trace tool to vectorize the characters and clean them up. My inspiration was to use the figures from the Heian period, as it was common for the royals to practice hanami, which is cherry blossom viewing. This tradition represents a deep aesthetic appreciation of beauty because of the short-lived nature of the flowers. The aristocrats would write poetry and drink sake, watching performances accompanied by music and dance. I thought using the image trace tool would save me time from vectorizing, but I kind of regretted it as I spent way too much time fixing the vectors and changing colors. I should have just vectorized them with the shape tools, but I was few hours deep into this and I could not stop now. After painfully refining the vectors, the fifth poster is complete.
5 posters down and we're officially halfway there. I'm not gonna lie, this was a lot harder than I expected. It's been more than a week working on these from ideation to execution. We've covered a lot today, but we've only scratched the surface of what I want to explore. Looking at these together, I'm already seeing fragments of me in that artwork, especially with the Bauhaus one being my favorite. If you want to see the final 5 posters, give this video a like, as it helps the channel out more than you know. In the meantime, comment below which out of these 5 styles were your favorite. I'll see you in part 2.